Welcome to Page One, the show for writers with the reader in mind. Here's your host, Zita Christian.
Hi everyone, welcome to Page One. I'm Zita Christian. My guest tonight is a professional weaver. She is an award-winning author. She is also a dream and creativity coach. She is a compassionate and very knowledgeable tarot reader, and she is a very, very dear friend. Her name is Paula Chaffee Scardamalia. Paula, thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you for inviting me. I love being here.
Good, good. Yeah, we did have you on a while back talking about your weaving, particularly focused on the weaving. We had some nice images of you at the loom, but you're here tonight to talk about another avenue that you pursue. In fact, for those of you who in the audience who watch our other show, Full Bloom, you might have seen the interview I did with Paula where she talked about dreams and how they can be used as a tool to explore and enhance your creative life, to kind of tell you when you might be off track. Well, tonight we're going to talk about another metaphysical tool, one of my absolute favorites. And because this is Page One, the show for writers with the reader in mind, this is a metaphysical tool that is exceptionally useful for writers. You might not think so at first, but trust me when I tell you it is. And that tool is the tarot. So Paula, a couple basics to begin with. What are the tarot cards?
The tarot is a very old system comprised of a group of images, about 78 cards. And depending on your orientation and what year whether you lived 100 years ago or 50 years ago and how you look at the cards, you can either look at them as an oracle, which is a way of connecting with spirit and getting messages from spirit, or in France and Italy, it's also called tarocchi, which is a game. So, and that's part of the discussion back and forth between experts about whether it started out as really a collection of images that held secrets or messages for people, or in fact it started out as a game.
Interesting. Okay, and we don't have to solve that
No,
problem
we don't.
tonight.
No, we don't.
But I did want to notice, since you mentioned about games and thinking, playing cards are so common, what is the correlation, just the general correlation about the suits from the tarot to playing cards that we might use today?
Well, as in playing cards, there are 4 suits in the minor arcana in the tarot. Now, the minor arcana, which means the minor or smaller secrets, arcana means secrets, there are 4 suits in the minor arcana, and there are cups, which is the equivalent of hearts in playing cards. There are the swords, which is the equivalent of diamonds. There are coins or pentacles, which is the equivalent of spades. And then there are wands, which is the equivalent of clubs in playing cards. So you have those 4 suits. However, in playing cards, you go from 1 to 10, which you also do in the tarot. But then you have the Jack, King, Queen. Or Jack, Queen, King. I kind of put the Queen at the end. She's,
Special.
But just special, very. But in the tarot, you usually have either a page, a knight, a queen, and a king, or sometimes it's a princess and a prince and a queen and a king. So you have one extra character in there that you don't have in the playing cards.
Okay. So how many tarot decks are there in the world?
Well, let's see. How many? You mean how many actual decks, or how many different decks?
Yeah,
or
the variety.
The variety. Unending.
Yes.
And there are people like Rachel Pollack, the author, who's written so many books about the tarot, who collect decks because of their historical significance or the variety and the importance of their symbolism and so forth. So there's hundreds and hundreds.
Well, how many decks do you have, or even just about?
Well, how many decks do you have?
Yes. Well, and I couldn't even count anymore. At last count, I counted them by the dozen, and I did gift some of them to some people. But I did find after a while, some appealed to me because of the artwork. Some appealed to me, I guess most of them because of the accompanying book, because most of the decks do come with a book. And some I just would collect just to see the varying images, you know, for one particular card. So I guess it's just a matter of what you like. But I do find that I have certain favorites.
Yes.
But before we get to that, because I just mentioned something that I think we should clarify, the concept of oracles. So we've talked about tarot decks and about their, you know, cards 1 to 10 and then the court cards. But what are oracle cards and how do they differ?
Well, the tarot is an oracle, but all oracle decks are not the tarot.
Okay.
So an oracle deck can be used to divine messages around the goddess, around healing, there's all kinds of oracle decks out there. There are a number of publishers of them, Llewellyn and Hay House and so forth, that publish different types of oracle decks. One of the oracle decks that we have here is the goddess deck. And those are, I think there's about 25 different goddess images in there. And you can pull a different goddess card, as we do.
Yes.
You know, with regularity and get a sense of the energy that the goddess is doing. Or, for instance, I have another deck, the Fairy Oracle that Brian Froud did, that has a collection of all the different kinds of fairies that he's done research and so forth on. And he's created his own structure for that. But it doesn't have the structure of the tarot with the 4 suits and the major arcana and minor arcana. So it's a very different thing.
Now, in the major arcana with tarot, my understanding has always been, or maybe it's just the way that I work with them, there is a correlation, not so sure how tight, but a correlation to the journey that Joseph Campbell talks about in the you know, the hero with 1,000 faces, that idea of the fool setting out on the journey and you know, a call to adventure of sorts and meeting various characters along the way. So in terms of that, we see the beginning of how tarot might be used for writers, which is what we're going to get to here in a moment. But before we do that, I do want to ask, do you have favorite decks?
You know, that's kind of like asking. That's the better question. What's your favorite now? Because it's kind of like asking what's your favorite child, you know. But right now I'm using a deck that Ciro Marchetti just published within this last year, and it's the Legacy of the Divine Tarot, and the images in that are quite lovely. And
is that this one here?
No, yes, it's the one underneath here. Yes.
Okay.
And he actually has a website, the Legacy of the Divine Tarot, and you can go on there, and some of the images are very, you know, the images are animated on the site, so it's really fun to go and explore the site. And I use these cards a lot. I love Rachel Pollack's deck when I'm using, working with mythic ideas and images, because her images have come from all different cultures and are very feminine in their orientation. James Wanless's deck, which is what these two are from, his are a lot of guys, when I do readings for men, they prefer this because there's a more, it's either like genderless or a little more masculine in its orientation and its imagery, and very contemporary, very contemporary. It's actually, that was my very first tarot deck. And when I tell people that's the one I learned to read with, they kind of go, what? Because it's a little more...
it's a little out there.
It's a little out. It's a little not quite so easily read as some of the other decks. Yeah.
Now I have favorites too, so I did want to just mention the Druid deck is my favorite.
Yes,
is one of my favorites. But I have to say, one of the things I mentioned earlier was that, you know, many people are drawn to a particular deck because of the artwork, and that has always been that way for me. I'm drawn to a deck because of the artwork. And so when I saw Rachel Pollack's deck, which is, let's see if I've got a couple of cards here. I meant to pull these out earlier. I'm sorry, did not.
Well, that was one of the things I loved about the Voyager deck. And it actually spoiled me for a lot of the other decks because I couldn't, it was so colorful and the images in it were so vibrant that to get to a deck that was very simple and its colors were very pallid just didn't work for me.
Didn't work.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have it here, but we do have the book here in front of Paula, this one, the Shining Tribe deck. Now that deck, I was not drawn to the images. In fact, when I looked at the artwork, I thought, no, that's just not for me. However, her book is so loaded with valuable information, and her suggested way of using the cards, she has the traditional way, but she has other suggestions for doing readings, that is by far my favorite deck now, and I use it in writing
Yes.
all the time. So before we get to that, though, I want to talk about some of the we've touched here a little bit on the differences in the artwork, and that becomes important here as we're looking at a couple things.
Very.
So I have two cards here over here to my left, and if we can just get a shot of these two cards. So what we're seeing here are two images of a card called the Hanged Man. And a lot of times, in Hollywood, when they have the movies, they'll show, if they have a tarot reader in the movie, and here comes the reader showing, oh, the Hanged Man.
Yeah, that one, or death.
Or death, yes.
Yeah.
But these are two images of the Hanged Man, and yet when you know the tarot, you realize that it's not about physical death at all. Not at all. And then next to those, there are two other images, or there are three images of another popular card that you see in Hollywood, in movies a lot. And these are images of the Ten of Swords, or in Rachel Pollack's deck, which is the very last one over here, the small one over on the end. She corresponds the swords to birds, so it's the Ten of Birds. But they're three very, very different kinds of artwork, all three portraying this Ten of Swords, which is, when you see it, it looks dire.
And one of the things I want to point out about this, it's very important for people to understand and look at in the tarot, if we can just see the image one more time, is that you can see in the first card from the left, you've got the man there who's about to be impaled on all these swords. You've got another image of a man who's already on the ground impaled. And then you have a woman standing there looking at this horde of birds, kind of like from the movie Alfred Hitchcock's Birds, coming at her. And when I do readings or work with clients, depending on which deck they choose, it influences what's coming through in the reading. Because the first man might be like, he's not impaled yet, so it might have to do with impending disaster, but something that hasn't occurred yet. Whereas as the next image over, okay, he's taken all he can take, he's surrendered, that's it, if he's not dead already. And the third one, oddly enough, I've gotten that card before in a reading, and sometimes it has to do with the activity of dreams. So depending on the deck and where it comes in the layout and so forth, influences the significance.
Well, when you talk about a reading, is there something where you need a certain number? Do you need a certain number of cards? Can you do a reading with?
And how many cards a day do you pull?
I pull one. Well,
yes,
I do a couple of things. I pull one card a day, just for like the energy of the day. But then I will ask 3 questions. Maybe a couple times a week. I'll sit down with my journal. I'll ask 3 questions, and that's when I use Rachel's deck, the Shining Tribe, which is wonderful.
Now, when I do pull cards for writing, when I a couple times a week, a friend of mine and I call each other and we say, all right, we're going to write now for an hour or 2 hours, and we'll say, what are we working on? Well, I'm not sure yet, or I know what and we'll hang up. As soon as we hang up, I'll take my deck, I'll shuffle it, I'll pull 3 cards, and I'll lay them out, having to do with the idea as I'm shuffling, what am I going to write about? What needs to be written about for the book? The next scene, or several scenes later, or something. What do I need to do? And I'll pull 3 cards. And I don't use those cards and say, well, I have to write about this, I have to write about... No, it's kind of like, it's a background there that says, this is the energy, these are the things I want to be mindful of. And I'll start writing. I'll just start writing. And by the time I'm done, sooner or later, the images on those cards...
They work their way into it.
Have worked their way into what I'm doing.
Now, I know also one of the uses of the tarot for writers. I remember specifically, I had a consultation with you. And I was telling you that I was having a problem with the heroine for a second book. She was a younger sister in the first book. Now I wanted to do a second book, and she was to be the heroine. And I had portrayed her in the first book as kind of loose. She had a high sleaze factor. She was going to be a little difficult to make as a heroine.
Right, and be sympathetic towards.
To be sympathetic. And she had been with many men. And I thought, how am I going to work this out? How am I going to, what kind of background can I give her so that the reader won't go, oh, no, she's not someone I would relate to.
Right.
So I gave you the background, a little bit of her background her older sister, who was the heroine of the first book, the mother, the eccentric mother in their family, and said, what do I need to know about this woman in order to get her into a heroic role?
Right.
And I remember we used the Druid deck.
Right, which is the deck that had the man with the 10 swords
with
in
the
his
10
back.
swords in his back,
Right.
yes. And in the Druid deck, the significant card that I pulled for her, who was the hero for her. And I remember pulling a bear.
Yes.
It was this gorgeous picture of this big bear.
Well,
And-
like a grizzly, yeah.
Yeah, it was a grizzly, and which I had my
Brought
own
you back,
encounter.
yes, right.
Yeah, with that in Montana last year, but that was a whole nother story. So here I pulled this image of a grizzly bear. Do you remember what you told me about her, about the bear, and about her relationship?
He had to have a nurturing characteristic to him. He had to
Yes.
have a strong sense of family, because bears have a very strong sense of family. And I think there was something about the nighttime too.
Yes.
And wasn't there something about him relating to her mother?
Yes, yes, that he was not frightened by her mother.
Yes, right.
So there was all kinds of things that came out from this, and I said, oh my God, take a note, take a note, take a note. And all of a sudden, I have a whole background
Right.
for this heroine that now explained why she took certain actions the way she did, why she would not allow herself to get close. Everything was on the surface.
Yes.
Everything was a very short
Yes.
term, one
Yes.
night relationships.
No commitments.
No commitments at all. But then we pulled several other cards to ask about, what did I need to know about her background? What did I need to know about what she wanted for the future? And all these ideas came
Do you
from
remember the
looking at
card?
images.
Do you remember the card, the Wheel of Fortune, with the woman drawing the circle in the dirt?
Yes.
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 Which had to do with her grandmother and the ancestry coming back to her in ritual and so forth. Yeah.
Yes, because part of the whole story was that she did not want to accept a destiny of magic
Right.
that she had received from her mother before her, and all of that came out because we used the images in the tarot.
In the tarot,
Now,
yeah.
I certainly could have, at the end of the consultation, looked at it and go, "That was nice. That was interesting. Not for me. Doesn't work for me." I mean, there's nothing that says, "Oh, you must use what's
No,
here."
absolutely not.
But it was so rich and it worked so beautifully.
Yes.
And I think part of the beauty of it is, when you're a writer, somewhere instinctively, if you write a lot, the story formation is in there. You just need something to pull it out.
Right.
And it's the images that pull out what's already inside. So tell me some of the other ways that tarot can be used for writers. I know one of the things that we had talked about once before was blocking. Oh, we only have 10 minutes. Oh gosh. Okay. Well, let's jump right in here. This whole idea of your most heart-urgent creative project.
Okay. Well, I have done readings for a number of clients who, they think they were asking about one thing.
Yes.
And we start doing the reading, and I have a reading that has to do with the cycles of the moon and transformation. Transformation is one of my key values working with people, because that's what you do with your work and your stories. And I start laying out the cards, and we think we're going in one direction, and all of a sudden a card comes up
That doesn't fit.
that we're not quite sure what's going on, and we start a dialogue back and forth about the card, and pretty soon something pops up to the surface that they have to sit and look at it for a few minutes. It's not a quick and easy thing, but once they get past that, they begin to see, oh, there's another project, and I do remember that, but they had buried it or forgotten about it amidst the other things.
And what about well, this is the one I think that I just described, that whole idea of finding the emotional juice with your character.
Oh, well, yes,
That's
that is
crucial.
very much, yes, and it is crucial. In fact, I'll use an example from my own work. One of those days, I pulled the 3 cards, and I was writing a story. One of my major characters has lost a child, the queen. The baby died when he was just a small boy, a toddler, and I didn't realize until I had pulled the cards, and I was writing the scene, I had pulled a card that was a page. Now, a page in the tarot represents a young person, sometimes a child. And in this deck, it's a very young boy. And all of a sudden I realized that part of what was going on for my heroine was that she could see the spirit of this small boy. And it wasn't until I pulled the card, I mean, I knew the child was there as the back story and had died, but it wasn't until I pulled the card and I was writing the scene that all of a sudden I realized the spirit was there.
Well, I think, too, this gets into something about the idea of how much does a person need to know about tarot in order for the cards to be useful to them as writers. Like, I'm sure there are writers in the audience, and you're thinking, okay, this sounds really cool, but I don't know anything about tarot. I don't have a deck. Where do they start?
Well, I would go to a store that carried decks, and I would do, as you and I have done, look at them, look at the imagery. Usually the stores have decks open so you can check through them.
Samples.
And find the one that most appeals to you. And then I wouldn't even say, if you want to use it for your writing, I wouldn't even worry about what the cards mean at first. I would just start pulling cards and see what the images say to you, what they might say about your work. And then if you wanted to get really into it, you can use the book with the deck. You can also use a book like Rachel Pollack's, Tarot Wisdom, or other books. There's lots of books out there on tarot.
Yes.
And so that would be a really good way.
Now, I do want to get into one little difficult issue here, because it comes up sometimes among people who don't know really what the whole idea of the tarot is. And that is the idea that, if you're having a reading, with someone like Paula, who works with as a creativity coach, to help people with, with their writing, or just, I know you just do regular tarot readings as well. The idea is you want to find a reader who is knowledgeable about the cards, but also passionate. And trust me when I tell you, I've been to a lot of different readers, and they don't all have those qualities. Not at all, unfortunately. And even if a person is compassionate but does not really understand the full meaning of the cards, sometimes that reading can cause I don't want to say harm, but a level of distress. But if you have a reader who is both knowledgeable about the cards, what's really going on, and is compassionate to what the situation is.
And is ethical.
And is ethical, yes, that's a biggie. Then the reading becomes a liberation.
Yes.
An
true opportunity for transformation.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. And one of the things, I always tell clients, I'm not telling your fortune. I'm giving you a mirror to see either your creative work or your life with more perspective so that you can make better choices. And just as I tell people when I do dream work, only take in what resonates, what feels true. If it doesn't feel true, don't take it in. You're the final authority on your creativity and your life.
Very, very, very true. Now, something else I wanted to ask about. We had talked one time about how you could use the tarot for determining the best time for you to write, or ways to organize your life around writing. Because for some of us who are still working full time, that gets tricky.
Yes.
So how might that work?
Well, again, you would. What's my question? What is the best time of day for me to work? Or what's the best routine or ritual for me to set up to encourage me to work? You could ask, what environment do I need to create? And then you pull a couple cards. You create your own spread by asking particular questions. What are the elements of the question? For instance, if you want to set up a routine, time of day, what room, and you can pull cards for each of those elements and see what they say.
And give me just some examples of what a card might say.
Well, for instance, if I pulled the sun, I might think I want to work when the sun's
daylight.
up,
Okay.
or the moon, vice versa.
Okay.
If I pull the hermit, I might think I really need a space that shuts the world out, where I don't have any distractions and I can just focus. If I pull the Three of Cups, where there's people celebrating, I like to be sociable, so maybe I need to go be sociable before I can focus on what it is I want to do.
Okay.
So there's lots of fun ways to work with it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, what about the idea of whether or not your story has a high concept? I mean, we've gone to the writers' conferences. You hear the editors and the agents all the time saying, make sure your book has a high concept. Well, how do you do that? I mean, that's so big. How can the tarot help?
Well, high concept is a lot about dealing with the big issue, the myth, the archetype that goes on in our lives, like loss of love, death, new birth, marriage, commitment, all those kinds of things, new career, beginnings. So if I wanted to figure out where my story might be short on high concept, I might separate the major arcana from the minor arcana and just work with those 22 cards, shuffle them, asking, what is the high concept in my story that I'm missing? And see what card comes up.
Okay, so for example here, let's say we do that and the card comes up of the Chariot.
Okay.
So what would you say? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
That's okay.
We didn't talk about this, but
That's
I know
all right.
you know the cards. So let's say I pull the Chariot.
Okay, well, one of the things I might think about, all right, your high concept in your story is you have a person who is being pulled apart by two critical demands in his or her life. Maybe it's family wants to pull this way and the desire to succeed is pulling this way. And one of those, maybe the Chariot crashes. So in the process of being pulled in two directions, this person has a crisis in their lives. Maybe they have a heart attack, or they can lose all their money or something like that makes them then have to evaluate, can I bring both of these together or do I have to let one go?
Okay. And see, this always gets me excited because then I want to go do a reading and just work on
Yes.
on the next scene. So when you're using the tarot for your own work, is there any particular format that you use, or is this idea of pulling the three cards and then just writing?
No,
is that what you do?
That's just one of the things. That's for regular writing. If I'm starting like a story, I might pull cards to represent different characters. What's the issue for each character? I can also, in fiction we have the plot points that we want to look at. Where are the several crises? Where's the climax? All of that. So I can pull cards for each of those. You can pull cards for any aspect of your writing.
And even if you don't know a lot about the cards, you'll get something from the action or the energy.
All
or
you've
the
got to do is
image.
look at the image and how you're responding to it and what's going on with it.
Paula, this whole thing is fascinating. And I know for those in the audience who do know the tarot, that's, something easily that they'll work with. But I think for those in the audience who don't know the tarot, they might want to give it a try. Now, I know you live in the foothills of the Catskill Mountains and know that you work with people individually and you work with people on the phone. And I think what I'm going to do, because I'm getting the signal we're out of time, is just tell you, if you want to get in touch with Paula, I know we've shown your website, but you can always get in touch with me also at page 1, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with her. So thanks again very much for coming from New York to be on the show tonight. My thanks to the crew also. And for you in the viewing audience, please remember the words of Ursula Le Guin, who said, "There have been civilizations that did not use the wheel, but there have been no civilizations that did not tell stories." So find your story, find a way to tell it, perhaps by using the tarot card.
Really?
And do join us again next time. Thank you.
Food for the crew and guests was provided by Manchester Grill of Manchester, Connecticut, and Angelo's Restaurant of Glastonbury, Connecticut. Be sure to send your writing questions and your comments on the book club selection to Zita at page 1, P.O. Box 1515, Manchester, Connecticut, 06045-1515, or send an email to Zita at page1tv.com.